The early morning sun crept through the thin, faded curtains of Jacob Carter's modest apartment in Chicago's Bridgeport neighborhood, casting a warm, golden glow across the small kitchen. The scent of sizzling bacon filled the air, mingling with the faint aroma of fresh coffee brewing in a well-worn pot on the counter. Jacob, a 38-year-old electrician with hands weathered by years of labor, stood at the stove carefully flipping pancakes for his 8-year-old daughter Lily. His calloused fingers marked by scars from countless hours spent wiring panels and repairing circuits moved with a quiet precision born of routine. At 6:30 a.m., the world outside was just waking up, but inside this tiny apartment, life was already in full motion. The kitchen table, scratched and slightly wobbly, held a scattering of crayons and paper evidence of Lily's early morning artistry. She sat cross-legged on a chair, her small frame hunched over a drawing, her tongue peeking out in concentration as she added vibrant streaks of color to her latest creation. "Daddy, look!" she exclaimed, her voice bright with pride as she held up her artwork. The paper showed 3 stick figures standing under a bold, arching rainbow, their hands linked in a chain of connection. "It's our family, see you, me, and—" She paused, her finger hovering over the 3rd figure, a woman with a wide smile and a necklace that gleamed in yellow crayon. "Someone who makes you happy." Jacob chuckled, ruffling her messy brown curls as he slid a pancake onto her plate. "You and your dreams, kiddo," he said, his deep voice warm with affection, always adding someone new to the picture. His dark eyes, steady and kind, carried a weight that Lily was too young to fully understand, a weight forged by years of loss and quiet resilience. In his shirt pocket, tucked close to his heart, was a small silver pendant, engraved with the words, "Always protect." It had belonged to his late wife Sarah, who had passed away 4 years ago, leaving Jacob to raise Lily alone. The pendant was his anchor, a reminder of the promise he'd made to her to shield those he loved, no matter the cost. "Daddy's never alone," Lily declared with the unshakable confidence of a child, her hazel eyes sparkling. "I'm always with you, and maybe someone else will be too." She pointed again to the mysterious 3rd figure, her smile wide and hopeful. Jacob shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He didn't have the heart to tell her that dreams of new connections felt distant, like stars too far to reach in his world of long hours and endless bills. Outside, the city of Chicago hummed to life. The distant rumble of the L train echoed through the neighborhood, blending with the honks of morning traffic and the chatter of early commuters. Jacob's apartment, though small, was a haven of love and simplicity. The walls were adorned with Lily's drawings, rainbows, flowers, and stick-figure families that told stories of a world where happiness was as easy as a crayon stroke. On the fridge, a magnet held a faded photo of Jacob, Sarah, and a newborn Lily, their faces glowing with a joy that now felt like a distant memory. Jacob glanced at it as he poured coffee into a chipped mug, his thoughts briefly drifting to the life he'd once imagined. But the moment passed, and he turned back to Lily, who was now adding glitter to her drawing. "Eat your breakfast, kiddo," he said gently. "We've got a big day ahead." Lily nodded, shoving a forkful of pancake into her mouth, her eyes still fixed on her artwork. "Do you think the new person will like rainbows?" she asked, her voice muffled by food. Jacob laughed softly. "If they don't, they're not worth meeting," he teased, though his heart ached at the thought of anyone new stepping into their little world. The morning routine continued with its familiar rhythm. Jacob packed Lily's lunch, a peanut butter sandwich, an apple, and a note that read, "You're my sunshine," while she gathered her crayons into a battered metal box. He checked his toolbox, ensuring his pliers, screwdrivers, and multimeter were ready for the day's work. As an electrician, Jacob's life was one of quiet dependability, fixing problems others overlooked, keeping the city's lights on one circuit at a time. His hands told the story of his labor, rough-scarred but steady, capable of both strength and gentleness. He glanced at his watch, 7:15 a.m. Time to get moving. Come on, Lily, he called, slinging her backpack over his shoulder. Let's get you to school. She hopped off her chair, clutching her drawing, and followed him out the door, her small hand slipping into his as they stepped into the crisp Chicago morning. The streets of Bridgeport were alive with the energy of a working-class neighborhood kids running to catch the bus shop owners opening their doors, and the faint scent of fresh bread from the corner bakery. Jacob and Lily walked hand in hand, her chatter filling the air with stories of school friends and the imaginary worlds she created with her crayons. After dropping Lily off at school, Jacob headed to his first job of the day, a routine maintenance call at a downtown office building. The city's skyline loomed ahead, a forest of glass and steel that felt worlds away from his life in Bridgeport. His truck, an old but reliable Ford, rattled along Lakeshore Drive, the radio playing a soft country tune that reminded him of Sarah. He touched the pendant in his pocket, a habit that grounded him when the weight of the world felt heavy. By noon, he'd finished the job and was about to grab lunch when his phone buzzed with an urgent call from his boss. "Jacob, we've got an emergency at the Sterling Pinnacle." The voice crackled through the speaker. "Their electrical system's acting up and they've got a big gala tonight. Can you get there now?" The Sterling Pinnacle was one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants, a glittering beacon of wealth perched atop a skyscraper in the Loop. Jacob had never set foot in a place like that, but work was work. "I'll need to pick up Lily from after-school care," he said, glancing at the time. "No problem," his boss replied. "Just get it done. They're desperate." Jacob sighed, already mentally preparing for the job. "On my way," he said, turning the truck toward the school. By 2:00 p.m., Jacob and Lily arrived at the Sterling Pinnacle. The restaurant was a vision of opulence, its glass walls offering a panoramic view of Chicago's Pointe skyline from the Willis Tower to the distant shimmer of Lake Michigan. Inside, crystal chandeliers sparkled like stars, and servers in crisp uniforms polished silverware to a mirror-like sheen. The air smelled of lavender and expensive wine, a stark contrast to the grease and metal of Jacob's usual work environment. He carried his toolbox, its weight a familiar comfort, while Lily clutched her crayon box, her eyes wide with wonder at the grandeur around her. "Daddy, it's like a castle," she whispered, her voice echoing slightly in the vast dining room. Jacob smiled, guiding her to a quiet corner near the electrical panel. "Stay here and draw, okay? Daddy's got to fix something." Lily nodded, settling onto a plush chair with her paper and crayons, her small fingers already sketching the chandeliers above. As Jacob worked testing circuits and tracing wires, the restaurant buzzed with preparations for the evening's gala. The event was hosted by Harper Industries, a global conglomerate led by Abigail Harper, a 29-year-old billionaire known for her ruthless business acumen and enigmatic presence. The gala was set to seal a multi-billion-dollar deal with international partners, and every detail had to be perfect. Jacob kept his head down, focused on the flickering lights and faulty wiring, but he couldn't help overhearing the chatter of early arriving guests. A group of wealthy patrons dressed in tailored suits and designer dresses gathered at a nearby table for pre-dinner cocktails. Their voices carried a casual arrogance, their laughter sharp and cutting. One man, his cufflinks glinting under the chandeliers, noticed Jacob and Lily. "Excuse me," he called out, his tone loud enough to draw attention. "I believe you've wandered into the wrong place." The table erupted in laughter, the sound grating against Jacob's ears. He glanced at Lily, who looked up from her drawing, her brow furrowed. "Daddy, why are they laughing?" she asked, her voice small but clear. Jacob's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone calm. "Just keep drawing, sweetheart. he said, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder. The man, undeterred, leaned forward, his voice dripping with mockery. This is the sterling pinnacle, my friend. Perhaps there's a diner down the street more suited to your attire. More laughter followed, and Jacob felt a familiar heat rise in his chest. He'd faced this kind of condescension before, people who judged him by his work boots and calloused hands, assuming he was less because he didn't wear a suit. But he said nothing, focusing instead on the wires in front of him. Lily, however, wasn't so easily silenced. "My daddy's fixing your lights," she said, her voice carrying across the room. The laughter faltered for a moment, but the man smirked. "Charming," he said, raising his glass as if to toast her innocence. Jacob's hand instinctively touched the pendant in his pocket, Sarah's words echoing in his mind, "Always protect." He took a deep breath, letting the moment pass. As he continued working, a commotion near the main dining area caught his attention. A young woman dressed in a simple but neat blouse and skirt had been bumped by a server carrying a tray of red wine. The liquid splashed across her outfit, staining the fabric a deep crimson. She gasped, her hands fumbling to dab at the mess with a napkin, her face flushing with embarrassment. The group of patrons at the cocktail table watched, their amusement evident. "Oh, how unfortunate," a woman in a sparkling gown remarked, her voice loud enough to carry. "Perhaps some people aren't cut out for places like this." The young woman, Eleanor Brooks, Abigail Harper's assistant, froze, her hands trembling as she tried to hide the stain. The laughter from the table grew louder, more cruel, and Jacob felt the air in the room shift, as if the temperature had dropped. He paused, his tools still in hand, his eyes narrowing slightly. Eleanor's shoulders slumped, her eyes glistening with unshed tears as she whispered apologies to no one in particular. Lily tugged at Jacob's sleeve, her voice barely a whisper. "Daddy, why are they being so mean to her?" Jacob knelt beside her, his voice low but firm. "Some people think putting others down makes them bigger, Lily, but they're wrong." He stood, his gaze lingering on Eleanor, who was now trying to slip away unnoticed. The patrons' laughter followed her, their phones already out to capture the moment for social media. Jacob's hand tightened around his screwdriver, not out of anger, but out of resolve. He remembered Sarah's pendant, her voice, her belief in doing what was right, no matter how small it seemed. He glanced toward the main entrance, where Abigail Harper had just arrived, her presence commanding the room. She wore a sleek emerald gown, her auburn hair swept into an elegant updo, but it was the silver necklace at her throat that caught Jacob's eye. It was nearly identical to the pendant in his pocket, its design hauntingly familiar. Abigail's eyes, a piercing green, scanned the room with mechanical precision, but beneath her composed exterior there was a flicker of something deeper, grief perhaps, or a memory she couldn't quite place. Jacob returned to his work, but his mind was elsewhere. The necklace, the laughter, the young woman's humiliation, it all stirred something in him, a sense of duty that went beyond fixing wires. He didn't know Abigail Harper, but he felt a strange connection, as if the pendant in his pocket and the necklace at her throat were pieces of the same puzzle. Lily, oblivious to the tension, added a new figure to her drawing, a woman with a silver necklace standing beside her and Jacob under the rainbow. "She looks important," Lily said, holding up the paper. Jacob glanced at it, his heart skipping a beat. "Yeah, kiddo," he murmured. "Maybe she is." As the gala preparations continued, the restaurant filled with the city's elite, their voices a symphony of wealth and power. But Jacob, in his worn work shirt and dusty boots, felt the weight of something greater, a promise, a memory, and a moment yet to come that would change everything. The late afternoon light filtered through the towering glass walls of Abigail Harper's office on the 55th floor of the Harper Industries headquarters in Chicago's Loop. The city sprawled below a mosaic of steel concrete and shimmering Lake Michigan, but Abigail's piercing green eyes were fixed on the contracts spread across her polished mahogany desk. At 29, she was a force of nature, the youngest CEO to helm Harper Industries, a global conglomerate built by her late father and brother. Her auburn hair was pulled into a severe bun, and her tailored blazer exuded authority, but it was the silver necklace at her throat, a delicate chain with a pendant engraved with "Forever Brave," that betrayed a softer, hidden part of her. She touched it absent-mindedly, a habit born of years of carrying a memory she couldn't fully grasp. The necklace was a gift from her brother Daniel, given to her just before the fire that claimed his life 12 years ago. Tonight's gala at the Sterling Pinnacle was more than a social event. It was the culmination of months of negotiations, a multi-billion-dollar deal with international partners that would cement Harper Industries' dominance in renewable energy. Abigail's assistant, Eleanor Brooks, knocked softly on the glass door. "Ms. Harper, the team at the Sterling Pinnacle confirms everything is set for tonight," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the nervous energy in her eyes. Abigail nodded, barely looking up. "Ensure every detail is flawless, Eleanor. We can't afford mistakes." Eleanor hesitated, then added, "The lighting issue was reported earlier, but they've got someone on it." Abigail's fingers paused on the necklace. "Good. No distractions tonight." Her tone was clipped, but beneath it lay a quiet unease, a flicker of something she couldn't name. Across the city, the Sterling Pinnacle buzzed with controlled chaos as the gala preparations reached their peak. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across tables draped in white linen, each adorned with centerpieces of orchids and sterling silver candelabras. Servers moved with practiced grace, their trays laden with flutes of champagne that caught the light like liquid gold. In a corner near the electrical panel, Jacob Carter knelt beside his toolbox, his calloused hands deftly testing wires. His work shirt, slightly frayed at the cuffs, stood in stark contrast to the opulence around him. Lily sat nearby, her small legs swinging as she colored in her notebook, her crayons scattered across a velvet chair. "Daddy, do you think the lights will sparkle like stars when you fix them?" she asked, her voice bright with wonder. Jacob smiled, his dark eyes softening. "Maybe, kiddo. Let's make sure they don't flicker first." He adjusted a circuit, the hum of electricity, a familiar comfort. The earlier mockery from the cocktail table still lingered in his mind, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the task. His hand brushed the silver pendant in his pocket. Always protect a reminder of Sarah's belief in standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. As the gala guests began to arrive, the dining room transformed into a showcase of wealth and influence. Men in bespoke tuxedos and women in designer gowns filled the space, their laughter and clinking glasses creating a symphony of privilege. Abigail Harper entered like a winter storm, her emerald gown flowing behind her, the silver necklace gleaming at her throat. Every head turned, conversations pausing as her presence commanded the room. She took her seat at the head of the main table, her green eyes scanning the international partners, CEOs, and investors from Tokyo, Dubai, and London, each representing billions in potential contracts. To her right sat Eleanor Brooks, her assistant, in a borrowed dress that didn't quite fit, the faint red wine stain from earlier still visible despite her frantic efforts to clean it. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her napkin, acutely aware of the scrutiny from the table. Abigail's voice cut through the ambient chatter, crisp and authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we forge the future of global energy." The table responded with polite applause, glasses raised in a toast to ambition and power. For a moment, everything seemed perfect, the culmination of Abigail's meticulous planning. But the illusion of perfection shattered when Vincent Caldwell, a London-based investor with a penchant for dominance, leaned forward, his sharp gray eyes locking on to Eleanor. "I must say," he announced, his British accent dripping with condescension, "I do hope we're not lowering the standards of this table with certain attendees." His gaze lingered on Eleanor's stained dress, and a ripple of amusement passed through the table. Eleanor's face flushed crimson, her hands gripping the edge of her seat as she tried to shrink into herself. Some individuals added Cassandra Lee, a tech mogul from San Francisco. Her voice, sharp as a blade, simply aren't suited for occasions of this caliber. Her laughter was cold-cutting, and others joined in, their phones subtly raised to capture Eleanor's humiliation. Eleanor's breathing quickened, her eyes darting to Abigail, who sat motionless, her expression unreadable. "Perhaps a dress code is in order," Vincent continued, emboldened by the crowd's reaction. "We wouldn't want to mistake this for a charity event, would we?" The laughter grew louder, a cruel chorus that echoed off the chandeliers. Eleanor whispered, "I should go," her voice barely audible as she started to rise, her hands shaking so violently she nearly knocked over her glass. That's when the air in the room shifted, as if a storm had rolled in unnoticed. Jacob Carter appeared beside the table, his work boots silent on the marble floor, his presence both unassuming and commanding. In his calloused hand, he carried a simple glass of water, its clarity a stark contrast to the opulence around him. Without a word, without acknowledging the shocked faces of the guests, he placed the glass in front of Eleanor, his movements deliberate and calm. The laughter died instantly, replaced by a stunned silence. Vincent's face reddened, his indignation palpable. "Excuse me," he sputtered, his voice rising, "but this is a private dinner. Who do you think you are?" Jacob looked up, his dark eyes meeting Vincent's with a steady calm that seemed to lower the room's temperature. "She's with me?" he said, his voice deep and unwavering, the three words carrying a quiet authority that reverberated off the walls. Forks paused mid-air, conversations halted mid-sentence, and even the servers against the wall seemed to hold their breath. Eleanor looked up at Jacob, her tears replaced by a flicker of wonder, her trembling hand steadying slightly. Vincent's face cycled through shades of red and purple, his composure unraveling. "This is outrageous!" he barked, slamming his hand on the table. "Do you have any idea who we are?" "Security." But Jacob didn't flinch, his hand resting lightly on the back of Eleanor's chair, his presence filling the room like a quiet tide. Abigail, still seated at the head of the table, felt her breath catch. There was something in Jacob's eyes, a depth, a resolve that stirred a memory she had buried deep. Her fingers moved to her necklace, tracing the words, "Forever Brave." And her heart raced, as fragments of a night long ago flickered in her mind. Smoke, heat, a voice promising safety. "You can't just barge in here," Cassandra snapped, though her voice lacked its earlier venom, as if Jacob's presence had unnerved her. "This is a business dinner for serious people." Jacob's gaze shifted to her, and she leaned back in her chair, suddenly small. "I'm serious," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that silenced her. "More serious than you know." Vincent stood his chair, scraping loudly against the floor, his face a mask of fury. "I demand to know who you are, and what gives you the right to disrupt this event." For the first time, Jacob's lips curved into a faint smile, but it was not warm. It was the smile of a man who had faced worse than their scorn and come out stronger. "I'm someone who keeps promises," he said, his voice steady. "Someone who knows what matters." Abigail's breathing grew shallow, her fingers gripping her necklace so tightly, her knuckles whitened. There was something about his voice, his stance, that sent chills down her spine. She saw it now, the way he stood protective yet unyielding, like a figure from a half-forgotten nightmare. The room remained frozen, the tension palpable as all eyes turned to Abigail. She sat still, her green eyes locked on Jacob, a storm of recognition brewing behind them. Vincent, sensing her hesitation, scoffed nervously. "Ms. Harper, surely you're not entertaining this electrician's nonsense." Abigail's voice, when it came, was low but sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. "Enough," she said, her eyes never leaving Jacob. "I think we need to pause this dinner." The words hung in the air, a challenge to the room's hierarchy. Vincent sputtered, but Abigail raised a hand, silencing him. "Mr. Caldwell, sit down," she said, her tone absolute. Reluctantly, he sank back into his seat, muttering about propriety. Abigail's gaze remained on Jacob, her heart pounding as she addressed him directly for the first time. "Sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "May I have your name?" Jacob met her eyes, his expression calm, but carrying a weight she couldn't yet understand. "Jacob Carter," he replied simply. The name hit Abigail like a physical blow, her hand flying to her necklace as memories surged, flames, a collapsing ceiling, a man's voice pulling her from the dark. Slowly, deliberately, Jacob reached into his shirt pocket and withdrew a small, folded piece of paper, its edges worn from years of being carried. "I believe this might mean something to you," he said quietly, unfolding it to reveal a handwritten note. Even from across the table, Abigail could see the familiar script, her brother Daniel's handwriting unmistakable despite the years. The note read, "To Jacob Carter, the man who gave me hope in the dark. You saved my sister. Never forget your worth." The signature below was Daniel Harper's, written in the shaky hand of a man who knew his time was short. Abigail's legs weakened and she gripped the table to steady herself, her mind racing back to that night 12 years ago, a fire that had consumed their family home. Daniel trapped in the flames, and a young firefighter who risked everything to pull her to safety. The room seemed to fade, the chandeliers and champagne glasses blurring as she stared at Jacob. The man who had once been her savior, now standing before her defending another. Eleanor, still seated, looked up at Jacob with gratitude and awe, her tears drying as she clutched the glass of water he'd given her. The other guests whispered among themselves, their earlier mockery replaced by curiosity and unease. Vincent's face was a mask of indignation, but even he sensed the shift in the room's dynamic. Jacob stood unmoved, his hand still resting on Eleanor's chair, his eyes meeting Abigail's with a quiet intensity. Lily, unnoticed until now, peeked out from the corner where she'd been drawing, her small voice breaking the silence. "Daddy, is the pretty lady okay?" she asked, holding up a new drawing, a woman with a silver necklace standing beside a man and a little girl under a rainbow. Abigail's breath caught as she saw the necklace in the drawing, its shape eerily similar to her own. The moment stretched heavy with unspoken truths as the gala stood on the brink of a revelation that would unravel everything. The dining room of the Sterling Pinnacle was a frozen tableau, the air thick with tension as Jacob Carter stood beside Eleanor Brooks' chair, his calloused hand resting lightly on its back. The crystal chandeliers above cast fractured light across the faces of the gala's guests, their earlier arrogance replaced by a mix of curiosity and unease. Abigail Harper, seated at the head of the table, gripped her silver necklace engraved with "Forever Brave." Her green eyes locked on the worn piece of paper Jacob held, its handwritten words, a bridge to a past she had tried to bury. The note, signed by her late brother Daniel, was a testament to Jacob's heroism 12 years ago when he, a young firefighter, had pulled her from a burning house. The revelation hung heavy, silencing the room, save for the faint clink of a glass, as a server in the corner shifted nervously. Vincent Caldwell, the London investor whose mockery had sparked the confrontation, stood rigid, his face a mottled red as he struggled to regain control. "This is absurd," he sputtered, his British accent sharp with indignation. "A scribbled note proves nothing. Anyone could forge a signature for a stunt like this." His voice echoed, but it lacked the conviction of moments earlier, as if he sensed the tide turning against him. The other guests, CEOs and magnates from Tokyo, Dubai, and San Francisco, exchanged uneasy glances, their phones lowered, no longer eager to capture the scene for social media. Jacob's expression remained calm, his dark eyes steady as he folded the note and slipped it back into his pocket. "I don't need to prove anything to you," he said, his voice low but resonant, cutting through Vincent's bluster like a blade through silk. "I'm not here for your approval." His words carried a quiet authority rooted not in wealth or status, but in a certainty that made the room feel smaller. Eleanor, still seated, clutched the glass of water Jacob had placed before her, her trembling hands now steady, her eyes wide with gratitude and something like awe. Abigail's heart pounded, her mind racing through fragments of that night 12 years ago, flames licking the walls, smoke choking her lungs, and a voice steady and sure, promising she'd be okay. She had been 17, trapped in the family's Gold Coast mansion, her brother Daniel screaming for her to run. But she hadn't run. She'd frozen, and it was Jacob who had carried her out, his arms shielding her from the collapsing ceiling. She hadn't known his name then, only his eyes, dark, determined, and unafraid. Now those same eyes met hers across the table, and the weight of recognition threatened to unravel her. Vincent, undeterred, took a step forward, his tailored suit creasing as he jabbed a finger toward Jacob. "You expect us to believe this? Electrician is some kind of hero. This is a business dinner, not a stage for fairy tales." His voice cracked, betraying his desperation to reclaim dominance. Cassandra Lee, the tech mogul who had joined in mocking Eleanor earlier, shifted uncomfortably, her earlier confidence replaced by a flicker of doubt. "Perhaps we should hear Miss Harper's perspective," she said cautiously, her eyes darting to Abigail, who remained motionless, her fingers white-knuckled around her necklace. The room turned to Abigail, waiting for her to restore order, to dismiss this disruption, and steer the gala back to its billion-dollar agenda. But Abigail's gaze was fixed on Jacob, her breath shallow as memories flooded back, memories she had locked away to survive the grief of losing Daniel, who had perished in the fire after pushing her towards safety. Slowly Abigail rose from her chair, her emerald gown shimmering under the chandeliers. The room held its breath, the silence so profound that the distant hum of Chicago's nightlife seemed to fade. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice steady but laced with an edge that made Vincent flinch, "I suggest you sit down." Her words were a command, not a request, and Vincent hesitated before sinking back into his seat. His face flushed with embarrassment. Abigail's eyes never left Jacob's. 12 years ago, she began, her voice soft, but growing stronger. With each word, "My family's home burned to the ground. I was 17, trapped on the second floor with my brother Daniel. The fire was everywhere, walls, ceilings, our memories. I thought I was going to die." Her voice wavered and she paused, her fingers tracing the necklace's pendant. "Someone broke through the smoke and carried me out. He risked his life, went back for my brother, but—" She faltered, her eyes glistening. "Daniel didn't make it. The man who saved me disappeared before I could thank him. All I knew was his name, Jacob." The room was utterly still, the weight of her words settling over the guests like a fog. Even the servers, who had been discreetly clearing plates, stopped moving, their eyes fixed on Abigail. Jacob stood unmoved, his expression calm but not untouched. A flicker of pain crossed his face, as if he too was reliving that night. "I was a firefighter back then," he said quietly, his voice carrying a gravity that silenced any remaining whispers. "I did what I was trained to do. I don't carry that note for praise. I carry it because your brother asked me to remember not just what happened, but why it mattered." He paused, his eyes meeting Abigail's. "He told me to look out for you, to make sure you never forgot who you are." Abigail's breath caught, and she reached into her purse with trembling hands, pulling out a small leather portfolio she always carried but rarely opened. The guests leaned forward, curiosity piqued, as she withdrew a single sheet of paper, its edges yellowed with age. "My brother left me this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was written the night he died in the hospital before he slipped away." She unfolded the letter, her hands shaking as she began to read aloud. "Abigail, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. But you're alive because of a man named Jacob Carter. He pulled you from the fire, gave you a second chance. He tried to save me too, but I told him to get you out first. Find him one day. Tell him he's family. Tell him he's worth more than all the wealth we'll ever have." Her voice broke, and tears spilled down her cheeks, catching the chandelier light like tiny diamonds. The room was silent, the words sinking in, transforming Jacob from an outsider in a work shirt to a figure of quiet heroism. Vincent's face drained of color, his earlier bravado crumbling under the weight of the truth. Cassandra Lee stood slowly, her voice small and mortified. "Mr. Carter," she said, bowing her head slightly, we had no idea. Please, accept my deepest apologies." One by one, the other guests rose, the Japanese CEO, the Dubai oil executive, the German financier, all standing in a gesture of respect for the man they had dismissed moments earlier. Eleanor, her eyes red but no longer tearful, looked up at Jacob, her voice barely audible. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the glass he'd given her as if it were a lifeline. Jacob nodded, a quiet acknowledgement that needed no words, but his attention shifted to the corner of the room where Lily had appeared, her small frame dwarfed by the grandeur of the dining hall. She held a fresh drawing, her crayons clutched tightly in her hand. "Daddy," she called, her voice cutting through the reverent silence. "I made this for the lady with the necklace." She skipped forward, oblivious to the tension, and held up her artwork, a simple sketch of a man in a work shirt, a little girl and a woman with a silver necklace, all standing under a rainbow. Abigail's breath hitched as she saw the drawing, the necklace in the sketch an uncanny match for her own. The child's innocence pierced her stirring emotions she had long suppressed, hope, connection, the possibility of healing. "How did you—" she began, her voice trembling, but Lily had already darted back to her corner, her laughter a bright note in the heavy atmosphere. Jacob watched his daughter go, a gentle smile softening his features. He turned back to the table, his voice quiet but resolute. "Sometimes the things that matter most don't come with a price tag." The words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through the room. Vincent, still seated, opened his mouth to protest, but found no words, his hands shaking as he realized the magnitude of his misjudgment. He had not only insulted a hero, but challenged the legacy of Daniel Harper, a name revered in the business world. Abigail, still holding her brother's letter, stepped forward, her composure fraying. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "you saved my life once, and tonight you saved someone else from being torn down. She paused, struggling to find words that could match the weight of the moment. "I want you and Lily to stay. As my guests, as family." The invitation was met with murmurs of approval from the other guests, their earlier scorn replaced by admiration. Jacob hesitated, his hand brushing the pendant in his pocket. "Always protect." "I didn't come here for recognition, Ms. Harper," he said softly. "I came to fix the lights. And to do what's right." His words were simple, but they carried a power that made the billionaires at the table seem small in comparison. Abigail nodded, her eyes glistening. "Then, let us honor what's right," she said, her voice steadying. "Please stay." The room erupted in applause, not the polite clinking of earlier, but a genuine outpouring of respect. Jacob remained calm, his hand resting protectively on Eleanor's shoulder as she wiped her eyes. Lily, now back at her corner, added a new color to her drawing, unaware of the transformation she had sparked. Abigail clutched her brother's letter, her necklace catching the light one last time, a symbol of a promise kept across years of pain and loss. The gala had been meant to forge business alliances, but it had become something more: a reckoning, a revelation, and a reminder that true worth lies not in wealth, but in the courage to stand for others. As the applause faded, the room buzzed with whispered conversations, the guests grappling with the truth they had witnessed. But Vincent Caldwell, his pride wounded and his authority shattered, rose abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, his voice barely audible as he gathered his papers. The night was far from over, and the greatest truths were yet to unfold. The Sterling Pinnacle's dining room glowed under the restored brilliance of its crystal chandeliers, the light dancing across the polished tables as the gala resumed. But the atmosphere had irrevocably changed. The air, once thick with the arrogance of wealth, now carried a quiet reverence, as if the room itself had exhaled a long-held breath. Jacob Carter stood near Eleanor Brooks's chair, his work shirt a stark contrast to the tailored suits and shimmering gowns around him, yet his presence commanded a respect that no amount of money could buy. Abigail Harper, still seated at the head of the table, clutched her brother's letter, her fingers tracing the familiar script as her green eyes flickered between Jacob and the child's drawing. Lily had left on the table a simple sketch of a man, a girl, and a woman, with a silver necklace all connected under a rainbow. The necklace, engraved with "Forever Brave," seemed to pulse with the weight of the night's revelations. Vincent Caldwell, the London investor who had led the earlier mockery, had slunk toward the exit, his face burning with shame as his footsteps echoed in the now hushed room. The other guests, global tycoons and industry titans, remained standing, their applause for Jacob fading into a respectful silence, their faces reflecting a mix of awe, guilt, and newfound understanding. Abigail rose slowly, her emerald gown catching the light as she addressed the room, her voice steady but infused with a warmth that had been absent earlier. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her gaze sweeping across the table. "Tonight was meant to secure the future of Harper Industries, but it has become something far greater, a reminder of what truly matters." She paused, her eyes settling on Jacob, who stood with quiet dignity, his calloused hands relaxed at his sides. "Mr. Carter didn't come here seeking recognition. He came to work to fix what was broken, and to stand for someone who needed him. That is the kind of strength my brother Daniel believed in, and it's the strength I want this company to embody." The guests nodded, some wiping their eyes, others exchanging murmurs of agreement. Eleanor Brooks, her borrowed dress still bearing faint wine stains, sat taller now, her face glowing with gratitude as she looked at Jacob. "Miss Harper," she said softly, her voice trembling but clear, I'd like to stay, if that's okay. I I want to be part of this." Abigail smiled, a rare softness breaking through her usual composure. "Eleanor, you're not just staying. I'm promoting you to my advisory team. Your heart belongs at this table." The room erupted in applause again, this time warm and genuine, a stark contrast to the cold laughter that had filled it earlier. Jacob nodded at Eleanor, a silent acknowledgement of her resilience, before his gaze shifted to the corner where Lily stood, her small hands clutching her crayon box. "Daddy, are we going home now?" she asked, her voice cutting through the room's hum with innocent clarity. Jacob knelt beside her, his dark eyes softening. "Soon, kiddo," he said, ruffling her curls. "But first, we've got one more thing to do." He glanced at Abigail, who was watching them with an expression caught between wonder and longing, her fingers still gripping her necklace. The drawing Lily had given her lay on the table, its waxy colors glowing under the chandelier light, a child's vision of connection that seemed to hold the room together. Abigail stepped forward, her voice quieter, now meant only for Jacob. "Mr. Carter, you and Lily have given me something tonight. I thought I'd lost forever hope. Please stay as my guests, not just for dinner, but as part of this moment." Jacob hesitated, his hand brushing the silver pendant in his pocket. Always protect the words of his late wife, Sarah, echoing in his mind. He wasn't here for accolades or invitations to elite circles. He was here because it was right, because Eleanor needed someone to stand for her just as he had stood for Abigail 12 years ago. But Lily's bright eyes, sparkling with excitement at the idea of staying in the castle, tugged at his heart. "All right," he said finally, his voice soft but firm. "For Lily." The room exhaled, the tension easing as Abigail gestured to a server. "Please set 2 more places at the table." The server nodded, moving swiftly to arrange chairs for Jacob and Lily, who bounded over her crayon box clutched tightly. As they sat, the guests returned to their seats, their earlier arrogance replaced by a quiet respect. Cassandra Lee, the tech mogul who had mocked Eleanor, leaned forward, her voice sincere. "Mr. Carter, I was wrong. We all were. Thank you for reminding us what courage looks like." The gala continued, but it was no longer just a business deal. Conversations flowed in softer tones, the clinking of glasses carrying a warmth that hadn't been there before. Abigail, seated beside Jacob, found herself watching Lily, who was happily sketching on a napkin, adding stars to her rainbow drawing. "She's remarkable," Abigail said, her voice barely audible over the hum of the room. Jacob smiled, his eyes on his daughter. "She's my world," he said simply. "She sees things the rest of us forget to look for." Abigail nodded, her fingers tracing her necklace as she thought of Daniel, who had always seen the good in people, even when she couldn't. "My brother would have loved her," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "He always said the smallest things, like a child's drawing, could change everything." Jacob glanced at her, his expression gentle but piercing. "He was right," he said. "It's the small things that keep us human." As the evening progressed, Abigail stood again, her presence commanding the room's attention. "Before we continue," she said, her voice carrying a new resolve, "I want to announce something, in honor of my brother Daniel and inspired by the courage of Jacob Carter. Harper Industries will establish the Daniel Harper Foundation, a fund to provide scholarships for children like Lily, who deserve every chance to shine, and support for workers like Eleanor, who bring heart to everything they do." The room erupted in applause, louder and more heartfelt than before, as guests rose to their feet. Lily looked up, confused but delighted, and whispered to Jacob, "Daddy, are they clapping for my drawings?" Jacob chuckled, pulling her close. They're clapping for what you remind them of, kiddo, something bigger than all this. Eleanor, now seated with newfound confidence, joined the applause, her eyes shining with pride and gratitude. Abigail turned to Jacob, her voice lowering so only he could hear. I spent years building walls around my heart, thinking they'd protect me from the pain of losing Daniel. But tonight, you and Lily tore those walls down. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small, folded piece of cloth, a fragment of the blanket Jacob had wrapped her in during the fire, singed but preserved. I kept this, she said, her voice trembling. It was all I had left of that night until now. Jacob's eyes softened, a flicker of recognition passing through them. You didn't need to keep it, he said. You carried what mattered most in here. He tapped his chest just above his heart, where his own pendant rested. Abigail's tears fell freely now, no longer hidden behind her composed facade. She reached out, placing the drawing Lily had given her in Jacob's hand. Keep this, she said. It's a reminder that you're not alone either. Lily, sensing the moment, tugged at Abigail's sleeve and held up a new drawing. A man, a girl, and a woman now standing under a bright sun, instead of a rainbow, their hands linked. You're not sad anymore in this one, Lily said, her voice bright with certainty. You're happy like us. Abigail's breath caught, and she knelt beside Lily, her gown pooling on the marble floor. Thank you, Lily, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. She clutched the drawing to her chest, the waxy colors glowing under the chandelier light, a symbol of hope reborn. Jacob watched, his heart swelling with pride for his daughter and a quiet gratitude for the moment they had created together. As the gala drew to a close, Jacob and Lily prepared to leave their simple presence, a stark contrast to the opulence around them. Abigail walked them to the exit, her steps slow, as if reluctant to let them go. The Chicago skyline sparkled beyond the glass walls, a city of dreams and struggles, and Jacob felt the weight of the night settle into something profound. You didn't just fix the lights tonight, Abigail said, her voice soft but certain. You reminded us all what light really means. Jacob smiled, his hand resting on Lily's shoulder. Some things are worth protecting, he said, echoing the words he'd lived by since Sarah's death. And some things are worth remembering. He glanced at Lily, who was already sketching in her mind, her eyes bright with new ideas. The lesson of the night was clear-etched into the hearts of everyone who had witnessed it. True worth lies not in wealth or status, but in the courage to stand for others, to act without thought of reward, to see the value in every person, no matter their place at the table. Jacob and Lily stepped into the elevator, the doors closing on the glittering world of the Sterling Pinnacle. Abigail stood alone, the drawing in her hands, her necklace catching the light one final time. She felt Daniel's presence in the child's artwork, in Jacob's quiet strength, in the promise of a new beginning. The city hummed below, unaware of the transformation that had taken place, but for those in the room, the world had shifted. A single act of kindness, a child's innocent vision, and a man's unwavering resolve had reminded them that the smallest moments can cast the greatest light.